Hi! Today's afternoon story is from Tatterhood and Other Tales, and it is called The Enchanted Bug. Lungila sat in the sunshine, watching her mother put the finishing stitches in her sedwaba. It was a great occasion, for the sedwaba is a full skirt of black ox skins, which no girl wears till her bridal morning. As it takes a long time to make, Lungila's father had prepared the skins many months ago. He had dyed them inky black with charcoal till they looked quite like velvet. Then Lungila's mother shaped the skirt to fit tightly around Lungila's waist and fall into soft folds at her knee, and stitched all the pieces together most beautifully. Now the skirt was ready, and Lungila might set out for the home of her betrothed as soon as she pleased. That evening she saw all the young women who were to accompany her to the wedding, and arranged the day they were to leave. It was kept a deep secret. Lungila's mother and father would not expect to know, for every bride loves to slip away in the early morning without farewells. 2 days later, at the first flush of day, Lungila and her friends set out on their journey. It was early summer. The valley and hills were covered with thousands of flowers, vivid scarlet or blue like the sky. The air was fresh and crystal clear, and the girls laughed and sang songs of travel. Lungila was full of joy, for her bridegroom was a chief's son, and she had chosen him out of many suitors. She was as cheerful and capable as she was lovely, and many young men had asked her to marry. She tilled the family's land, wove fine reed fences, and the beer she made was the best for miles around. There was no kraal where she would not have been welcome. The girls journeyed together for some days, till at last they reached the bridegroom's land and went straight to his parents' kraal. His mother greeted them with every kindness, and showed them to a beautiful hut where they would stay till the day of the marriage. They had been expected for some time, and now every man and woman in the village was kept busy with the marriage preparations. While the women ground corn or went out to gather wood, the bridegroom and his father considered what oxen should be killed for the feast. "We will take 2 of those Chief Manginde sent to me as your sister's marriage gift," said the father. "They are the finest in the herd, but my eldest son and his bride deserve the best." The first ox was driven up and killed with much ceremony. When all was ready for cooking, and the guests already nearing the kraal, the meat was cut into long strips and set on the fire to roast. As the bridegroom's mother watched in horror, the meat began to jump about on the fire. It simply would not stay in place, and after trying to make it lie still twice, she became frightened. "There must be witchcraft here," said she, and hurried to call her husband to see this strange thing. She had left the strips of meat on the fire, but when she returned with all the family and guests at her heels, not a bit of the meat remained. All of it had disappeared. "The animal was bewitched," cried the father. Everyone looked at the bride's hut. She was a stranger, and they suspected her. "Bring the white bull," said the father. "He is the finest we have. Perhaps if we kill him, it may break the spell." The white bull was brought forward, the most splendid of all the cattle the bridegroom's father had received from Chief Maginde 2 years before. He was snow white from head to tail, save for 2 long black horns of great beauty. The bull was killed and the meat cut up. This time it was placed in large pots to boil. All stood by and watched. Even the bride had heard of the trouble and waited anxiously in her hut, for witchcraft at her marriage was indeed a misfortune. For a while all seemed quiet. Then the water began to boil in the pot in which the bull's head had been placed. Instantly there leaped out of the pot a fine young man, with a bearing like that of a great chief. He ran away with incredible speed, and even as he ran he changed into a handsome buck with large antlers. In a moment he was out of sight. "Bring the bride here," said the chief. "Without doubt, she is a witch and has brought trouble on us all." In a few minutes, Lungila was brought from her hut with her maids. "Go back home," shouted the chief, "and never let us see your face again. You are not the wife for my son, nor would any decent family want you. I send you back to your parents and demand the return of my marriage gift of cattle." "I am innocent of all harm," cried Lungila. "I have cast no spells and wish no evil to anyone." "Go away, go back to your village," shouted all the people there. "You have brought witchcraft here." Then they drove her out quickly. She did not further attempt to prove her innocence, but traveled home with her attendants in bitter anger. Her father and mother were horrified when they heard of her treatment. They did not for a moment believe their daughter was a witch. The marriage gift was returned, and Lungila took her old place in the kraal again and worked as she had before. Only no more suitors came, for no one quite liked the story of the white ox with the black horns. It looked as if the skirt of black ox skins might never be worn. More than a year went by, and Lungila gradually forgot her troubles. One day in autumn, she went out to gather dried mealy stalks. The air was cool, the sun shone brightly over the great plains, and she sang gaily as she walked along the narrow path. Just as she was about to turn off toward the field, a beautiful buck came in sight. To her surprise, it did not run away, but circled round her, running across the path and slipping in and out of the bushes. She thought she recognized him. "Where have I seen this handsome animal before?" she said to herself, and thought a minute. "Why, it is the very same buck that jumped out of the pot at my marriage feast." For a moment she felt sad. Then she threw back her head and laughed. "Now he will be caught. It is many days since we had meat. I will try to catch him as he passes." The buck continued to dance around her, coming nearer and nearer, but always just slipping out of her reach. They had left the village lands behind and were drawing nearer to the mountains. She followed till they came to a stream which flowed down a green valley. There the buck stopped to drink, and Lungila jumped forward and seized him by the horns. He seemed not to mind, and drew her with him on a path which ran up the valley near the stream. Lungila found the buck was far stronger than she expected. She could not turn him back, and she would not let him go. The valley was empty and wild. High, waving grasses surrounded her. As they went on, a huge forest came into view, which covered the lower slopes of a mountain. A blue shadow began to creep across the valley. Lungila saw it and thought, "I shall hardly reach home before dark. The buck is too strong for me. I must give him up." She let him go with a sigh and hurried back to reach the plains again before sundown. She had not gone far when she turned her head to see if the buck was still in sight. To her surprise, he was following her. She stood still, and in a few minutes the buck was at her side. "What do you want?" asked Lungila. The buck only looked at her with his great brown eyes and said nothing. Lungila spoke again, She was sorry for the buck and felt sure that he was in trouble. This time the buck answered in a soft, low voice, "Follow me to the forest yonder." "I will come," said Lungila, and turned once more to the great mountain and the forest at its foot. Before long they reached the first great trees, and there at the entrance to the forest they saw a sight which made Lungila cry out in terror. A huge ogre, seated on a wolf, was staring at them. Round his forehead he wore a string of animals' eyes, which made him look even more horrible. Lungila turned to run, but the buck said to her calmly, "Come, and you will see what I can do." And he walked straight toward the ogre. The girl followed, but shivered as she heard the ogre say to the buck, "Ha! You will make a fine meal for the wolf, and that young girl will be my dinner." Then he stretched out his long arms and leaped forward to catch the buck. The buck did not move, but the instant the ogre's arms touched him, the buck changed into a powerful young man with a spear. The wolf ran off, frightened, into the bush. The ogre, taken by surprise, was slain with the spear. The young man took the string of animals' eyes from the slain monster's head and threw them on the ground. Instantly, they became living bucks. They all looked at the man with great affection and waited for his command. The young man then turned to Lungila and said, "Will you be kind to these animals and help them? Remember, I, too, was a buck." Lungila nodded, and the young man went on. "Stay here for a few days and do this for me. Gather greens every morning at sunrise and chant this magic song. Once my true love was a buck. Once my true love was a buck. Now he is changed to a strong young man. Now bucks, oh bucks, change, change and become young men." "I will do this," said Lungila with admiration in her eyes. "But tell me, are you the white ox who was killed at the marriage feast? And who are these bucks I will sing to?" "I am that same white ox," said the young man. "I am a great chief. Because my lands were better than Chief Maginde's, and because I had finer cattle and stronger people, he hated me. One day he bewitched me and turned me into a white ox and said that all my people should be deer. None should be free till I could change my form and once more be a man. He sent me as a marriage gift to the father of your betrothed, and so I came to be killed. You lost your first lover through me, but do not grieve. You will be loved and honored if you will be my bride." Lungila consented with great joy. She stayed at the edge of the forest for many days. Every morning at sunrise, she rose when the dew was still heavy and sang the magic song as she gathered the green leaves up and down the hillside. And every day more and more bucks came down from the mountains and clustered in the forest. They brought with them the does and the fawns, and in 7 days many thousand had gathered together. Then one morning, as she sang the magic song, they all changed at the sunrise into men, women, and children. This was how the enchanted buck regained his people and won a kind, courageous bride. Proudly he returned with Lungila to her village. The marriage gift he gave to her parents was magnificent, and Lungila married the young chief amid much rejoicing. The end.